"Trust me, I'm on your side," my coworker Melissa said while secretly sabotaging my biggest project. I believed her for months. When she stepped onto that awards stage expecting my recognition, the look on her face when they called my name instead, I'll never forget it. Here's how I discovered my closest work ally was actually my worst enemy. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday when I found the email that would shatter everything I thought I knew about trust, friendship, and the cutthroat world of corporate consulting. The fluorescent lights in the 32nd floor of the Meridian Tower hummed their familiar tune, casting that sickly blue glow over my cluttered desk at Hearthstone and Associates. I wasn't supposed to be there. Hell, nobody was supposed to be there at that ungodly hour except maybe the cleaning crew and the occasional insomniac analyst burning through another all-nighter. But here I was, Alexandra Chen, 30 years old, senior consultant with supposedly everything to prove and apparently everything to lose. Hunched over my laptop with my fourth cup of coffee going cold and my eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets. For the better part of 14 hours straight, the Meridian Industries proposal was due in exactly 6 hours and 23 minutes, not that I was counting. The presentation that could make or break my shot at the VP track. The project that had consumed my life for the past 8 months, stolen my weekends, turned my apartment into a secondary office, and cost me what little remained of my social life after business school. This wasn't just any client. Meridian Industries was the white whale of corporate consulting contracts. A Fortune 100 manufacturing giant looking to completely overhaul their global supply chain operation. Is the kind of project that gets written up in Harvard Business Review, the kind of win that launches careers into the stratosphere, the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a decade if you're lucky, and I had it. Or at least, I thought I did. 3 consulting firms were competing for the contract. Hearthstone and Associates, where I'd been grinding for the past 4 years, Blackstone Strategic Solutions, our biggest rival, and McKinsey. Because of course McKinsey was involved. But our proposal was different, revolutionary even. I'd identified inefficiencies in Meridian's current system that the other firms hadn't even noticed. I'd developed a predictive analytics model that could save them $47 million annually. I'd cracked the code. At least, that's what I thought until 2:47 a.m. when my world imploded. I was doing one final review of the client presentation, checking and double-checking every slide, every data point, every carefully crafted argument that would hopefully secure the biggest contract of my career. That's when I noticed something strange in my email. My sent folder showed 1,247 messages, but I could have sworn it was 1,246 when I last checked an hour ago. Now, in the grand scheme of corporate espionage and workplace betrayal, one extra email might not seem like much. But when you're an obsessive perfectionist who color codes her calendar and knows exactly how many emails she's sent in any given month, one unexplained message is like finding a footprint in fresh snow. I clicked on my sent folder, sorting by most recent, and there it was, sitting at the top like a smoking gun. An email sent 3 days ago at 11:43 p.m. with the subject line Meridian Industries, confidential strategic proposal. The blood drained from my face so fast I actually felt dizzy. I hadn't sent any emails about Meridian at 11:43 p.m. 3 days ago. I knew this because 3 days ago at 11:43 p.m. I was at Rossini's Italian bistro celebrating my college roommate, Jessica's promotion, trying to forget about work for exactly 2 hours before the final sprint to the deadline. I remembered the exact time because I'd checked my phone obsessively all evening, paranoid about missing something important. My hands were trembling as I clicked on the email. The recipient field made my stomach drop into my shoes. David Morrison at blackstone-strategic.com. David Morrison, senior partner at Blackstone Strategic Solutions, or primary competitor for the Meridian contract. The email was sent from my corporate account with my signature, formatted exactly the way I always formatted my messages, but the content was a detailed summary of every key insight, every innovative strategy, every proprietary methodology I developed for the Meridian proposal. 8 months of work, condensed into a neat little package and delivered directly to our biggest rival. The message was brief, professional, and devastating. David, as discussed, please find attached the key strategic elements of our Meridian Industries proposal. The predictive analytics model and supply chain optimization framework should be particularly relevant to your team's approach. The inefficiencies we've identified in their Denver and Phoenix operations represent the biggest opportunity for cost savings, approximately $47 million annually if implemented correctly. Looking forward to our continued collaboration. Best regards, Alexandra Chen, Senior Consultant, Heartstone and Associates. Attached to the email were 4 files I recognized immediately. My complete competitive analysis. The proprietary forecasting model I'd built from scratch, detailed client research including confidential financial data, and worst of all, my presentation slides scheduled for delivery in less than 6 hours. I stared at the screen, reading and rereading the email, hoping somehow I was hallucinating from caffeine overdose and sleep deprivation. But the words didn't change, the timestamp didn't change. The devastating reality didn't change. Someone had accessed my email account and systematically handed our entire strategy to the competition. But who, and more importantly, how? I immediately checked my email settings, looking for signs of unauthorized access. Nothing. No unusual login locations. No password changes, no forwarding rules I didn't recognize. Whoever did this had been careful, professional, and most terrifyingly, had intimate knowledge of both my email habits and the Meridian project details. That's when the pieces started falling into place, each realization hitting me like a physical blow. 3 days ago, I had shared my completed Meridian analysis with exactly 3 people. My boss Richard Heartstone, who'd been traveling in Singapore and couldn't have accessed my email. Our IT director Marcus Webb, who'd been on vacation with his family in Vermont, and Melissa Rodriguez, my cubicle neighbor, project collaborator, and the person I'd foolishly started to consider one of my closest friends at the company. Melissa, who'd been working late with me every night for the past month. Melissa, who'd brought me coffee and Chinese takeout during my marathon work sessions. Melissa, who'd listened to me stress about every detail of the proposal and offered constant encouragement. Melissa, who'd looked me in the eye just yesterday afternoon and said, "Don't worry, Alex. Trust me, I'm on your side. We're going to nail this presentation together." Melissa, who had my computer password because I'd given it to her 2 weeks ago when my laptop crashed and I needed her to retrieve a file from my desktop while I was in a client meeting. The betrayal hit me like a tsunami. Not just the professional implications, though those were catastrophic enough, but the personal violation. For the past 8 months, Melissa had been my work wife, my confidant, my partner in the trenches of corporate consulting hell. We'd shared lunches, weekend work sessions, complaints about our demanding boss, dreams about future promotions. I'd opened up to her about my struggles with imposter syndrome, my anxiety about being one of the few Asian American women at my level in the company, my desperate need to prove myself worthy of the VP track. And she'd been playing me the entire time. I thought back to all our recent conversations with new eyes, how she'd always been so interested in the specific details of my research, how she'd volunteered to help with data analysis, insisting she didn't mind staying late, how she'd asked pointed questions about my methodology, claiming she wanted to learn from my approach, how she'd been so supportive when I'd expressed doubts about whether my innovative strategies were too risky. She hadn't been helping me, she'd been harvesting information. But why? Melissa was a junior analyst, 2 levels below me, working on completely different accounts. She had no obvious motive to sabotage my project unless she wasn't working alone. I grabbed my phone and started searching LinkedIn for Melissa Rodriguez. Her profile showed she'd been at Heartstone for just over a year, having joined straight out of her MBA at Northwestern. But when I dug deeper, checking her connections and previous experience, I found something that made my blood run cold. Before business school, Melissa had worked for 3 years as a research analyst at Blackstone Strategic Solutions, the same company that had just received my entire Meridian proposal. I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't a random act of opportunistic betrayal. This was a calculated, long-term infiltration. Melissa hadn't just stumbled into a position where she could sabotage me, she'd been placed there specifically for this purpose. How long had she been feeding information to her former colleagues at Blackstone? How many other Hearthstone proposals had been compromised? How many other careers had she torpedoed from the inside? And the most terrifying question of all, what was I going to do about it? The Meridian presentation was in less than 6 hours. Blackstone now had access to every single strategy I'd planned to present. They would be prepared for every argument, every innovation, every competitive advantage I'd thought I had. Walking into that boardroom would be like showing up to a gunfight with a water pistol, but calling in sick wasn't an option. This presentation represented 8 months of my life, and more importantly, it was my shot at proving I belonged in the upper echelons of management consulting. If I bailed now, I'd never get another opportunity like this. The partners would write me off as someone who couldn't handle pressure. My career trajectory would flatline. I had to find a way to turn this disaster into an opportunity. That's when I remembered something Melissa had said just 2 weeks ago during one of our late-night work sessions. We'd been discussing presentation strategy, and she'd mentioned how she thought the Meridian executives would respond best to a certain type of data visualization. At the time, I'd thought she was being helpful, offering insights based on her research into the client's preferences. Now I realized she'd been fishing for information about my presentation format so Blackstone could structure their proposal to maximize impact. But here's what Melissa didn't know about me. Here's what she couldn't have anticipated in all her careful planning and manipulation. I don't just create one version of anything. I'm a consultant who plans for every possible scenario, every potential objection, every competitive response. While Melissa had been stealing my primary strategy, I'd been developing to back up approaches that were even more innovative than the original. She'd given Blackstone my good ideas, but my best ideas were still locked in my head. I pulled up a new document and started typing furiously. If Blackstone wanted to play dirty, I'd show them exactly what dirty looked like when executed by someone who'd grown up fighting for every opportunity in a world that seemed designed to keep people like me on the sidelines. Over the next 4 hours, I completely restructured my presentation. I kept the basic framework Melissa had seen, no point in making it obvious that I knew about the leak, but I embedded several new strategic elements that would make Blackstone's stolen approach look derivative and outdated by comparison. More importantly, I set a trap. I included 3 specific recommendations in my presentation that appeared brilliant on the surface but contained subtle flaws that would become obvious to anyone with deep industry knowledge. If Blackstone used my stolen material, they'd inevitably adopt these flawed strategies, giving me the perfect opportunity to expose their theft during the Q&A session. As the sun started rising over downtown Chicago, painting the office in warm golden light, I finally felt ready. Not just for the Meridian presentation, but for war. Melissa arrived at the office at 8:30 a.m., her usual time, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the Starbucks downstairs. She looked perfectly normal, professionally dressed in her navy blazer and white blouse, hair pulled back in a neat bun. Wearing that same friendly smile she'd worn every day for the past 8 months. "Morning, Alex," she called out cheerfully, setting one of the coffees on my desk. "Vanilla latte, extra shot, just the way you like it." Ready for the big day. Looking at her now, knowing what I knew was surreal. She was still playing the role of supportive colleague, right up until the moment she'd watch me crash and burn in that boardroom. "Thanks, Mel," I managed to say, taking the coffee and forcing a smile. "I'm as ready as I'll ever be." "You're going to kill it," she said, leaning against my cubicle wall in that casual way that had always made our conversations feel natural and unforced. "I've been thinking about your presentation all morning. Those supply chain optimization strategies you showed me. Absolutely brilliant. Meridian would be crazy not to choose us." The audacity was breathtaking. She was literally complimenting strategies she'd already stolen and handed to our competitors. "I hope you're right," I said, keeping my voice steady. Despite the rage building in my chest, this could change everything for me, for both of us, she said with what appeared to be genuine warmth. When you get that VP promotion, don't forget the little people who helped you along the way. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been touched by her apparent loyalty. Instead, I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled and nodded, and played my part in her elaborate charade, all while planning exactly how I was going to destroy her career and expose Blackstone's corporate espionage operation. The Meridian presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main conference room at their corporate headquarters. 3 firms, 3 presentations, 3 teams fighting for the contract that would define the next phase of their careers. What Melissa didn't know was that I'd already won. Not the contract, that remained to be seen, but the war. Because, while she'd been stealing my strategies, I'd been building something much more valuable. A case for corporate espionage that would end her career and possibly land her in federal prison. As I packed up my presentation materials and prepared to head to Meridian's offices, I thought about how different this day would have gone if I hadn't found that email. I would have walked into that boardroom confident and unprepared, only to watch Blackstone present my own ideas back to me. I would have lost the contract, my credibility, and possibly my job, never knowing why. Instead, I was walking into that boardroom armed with the knowledge of exactly who my real enemies were. And in 3 weeks, when the Chicago Consulting Excellence Awards ceremony rolled around and they announced the winner of the Innovation and Strategic Planning Award, an honor I'd been nominated for based on my Meridian work, Melissa was going to learn that sometimes the person you betray is exactly the wrong person to underestimate. But that's getting ahead of myself. First, I had a presentation to give and a trap to spring. As I walked toward the elevator, my heels clicking against the polished marble floor of the Meridian Tower lobby, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete confidence. Not because I was certain I'd win the contract, though. I was increasingly optimistic about my chances, but because I finally understood the game I'd been playing. And I was very, very good at games. 6 months earlier, life at Hearthstone and Associates had been predictably ordinary. I'd wake up every morning at 5:30 a.m. in my 1-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, do 30 minutes of yoga while CNN droned in the background, grab a green smoothie from the place downstairs, and catch the red line to downtown Chicago. Same routine, same schedule, same desperate hunger to prove myself in a world that seemed designed to keep ambitious women like me perpetually climbing. Hearthstone and Associates occupied floors 30 through 34 of the Meridian Tower, a gleaming monument to corporate ambition that pierced the Chicago skyline like a steel and glass exclamation point. The consulting firm had been founded in 1987 by Richard Hearthstone, a former McKinsey partner who'd built his reputation on helping Fortune 500 companies navigate complex operational challenges. By the time I joined 4 years ago, fresh out of Wharton with my MBA and a mountain of student debt, Hearthstone had grown into one of the most respected mid-tier consulting firms in the Midwest. Not McKinsey or Bain, but respectable, the kind of place where brilliant analysts could build solid careers if they were willing to work 90-hour weeks and sacrifice their personal lives on the altar of client satisfaction. I'd been doing exactly that for 4 years. 4 years of proving myself on project after project, slowly climbing from junior analyst to senior consultant, earning the respect of partners and clients alike. 4 years of being the first one in the office and the last one to leave, of turning down weekend plans and vacation invitations, of building a reputation as someone who could handle the impossible deadlines and demanding clients that broke lesser consultants. The work was brutal, but I loved it. There's something intoxicating about walking into a client's boardroom, identifying problems that have been plaguing their organization for years, and presenting solutions that could save them millions of dollars. The intellectual challenge, the high stakes, the rush of winning a major contract, it was addictive. My cubicle was on the 32nd floor, nestled in a maze of identical workstations that housed the senior consultant and junior analyst teams. It wasn't much to look at: standard corporate furniture, dual monitors, a small shelfware. I kept my MBA diploma and a photo of my parents at my graduation, but it represented everything I'd worked for since leaving my hometown of Sacramento 8 years ago. The floor had a weird energy that I'd grown to love. During the day, buzzed with the controlled chaos of consultants juggling multiple client projects, analysts building complex models, and partners racing between meetings. The coffee maker in the break room worked overtime, fueling late-night strategy sessions and weekend work marathons. The whiteboards in every conference room were covered with flowcharts, revenue projections, and implementation timelines written in different colored markers. It was competitive, demanding, and absolutely exhausting. It was also where I'd found my tribe, or at least, where I thought I'd found my tribe. Melissa Rodriguez had started at Hearthstone 13 months ago, joining as a junior analyst fresh out of Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. She'd been assigned to the cubicle next to mine, close enough that we couldn't help but overhear each other's phone calls and see each other's computer screens if we turned our heads. From day one, she'd been everything you'd want in a workplace neighbor: friendly but not intrusive, hardworking but not cutthroat, smart enough to handle complex projects but humble enough to ask for advice when she needed it. She had this way of making even the most stressful days feel manageable, showing up with extra coffee when deadlines loomed or staying late to help with data analysis when projects got overwhelming. I remember her first week clearly. She'd arrived every morning at exactly 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes before most analysts typically showed up, carrying a leather messenger bag and wearing carefully chosen business casual outfits that walked the line between professional and approachable. Her workspace was meticulously organized, color-coded files, matching desk accessories, a small succulent plant that somehow thrived under fluorescent lighting. What struck me most was how naturally she seemed to fit into the Hearthstone culture. Consulting firms have their own ecosystem, their own unwritten rules about everything from how to format PowerPoint slides to which partners you could joke with and which ones demanded absolute formality. New hires usually took months to figure out these nuances, but Melissa navigated them effortlessly from week one. She asked thoughtful questions during team meetings, volunteered for additional work without seeming desperate, and somehow managed to be helpful without being annoying. When senior consultants like me were drowning in client demands, she'd quietly step in to handle research tasks or data validation, never asking for credit but always delivering quality work. Within 2 months, she'd become the kind of colleague everyone wanted on their project team. Our friendship developed gradually, the way workplace relationships often do. It started with casual conversations while waiting for the elevator or grabbing lunch from the cafeteria on the 30th floor. She'd ask about my projects, not in a nosy way, but with genuine curiosity about the strategic challenges I was working on. I found myself looking forward to these brief exchanges, appreciating having someone to talk through complex problems with. Melissa had a gift for listening, really listening. Not just waiting for her turn to talk. When I'd describe a particularly difficult client situation or a complex analytical challenge, she'd ask insightful follow-up questions that helped me think through solutions. She never tried to offer advice beyond her experience level, but she had this way of helping me organize my thoughts just by being an engaged audience. The breakthrough in our relationship came during the Carlson manufacturing project, a mid-sized engagement I was leading about 4 months after Melissa joined the firm. The client was a family-owned company that manufactured industrial equipment, and they were struggling with supply chain inefficiencies that were eating into their profit margins. It was exactly the kind of project I loved, complex enough to be intellectually challenging, but small enough that I could really make a difference. The problem was timeline. Carlson's CEO, Margaret Carlson, was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd inherited the company from her father and built it into a regional powerhouse through sheer force of will and attention to detail. She wanted our recommendations in 6 weeks, half the time we'd normally allocate for that scope of analysis. I was working 16-hour days, building financial models and conducting supplier interviews. When Melissa appeared at my cubicle one Thursday evening around 9 p.m. with a cup of coffee and an offer to help, "I know you didn't ask," she said, setting the coffee on my desk, "but I've been watching you kill yourself on this Carlson project. And I have some experience with supply chain analysis from my previous job, if you want an extra pair of hands. For data validation or research, I'm happy to stay late." I was exhausted enough to accept help from anyone, even a junior analyst who'd been at the firm for less than 4 months. "Are you sure this isn't your project, and Richard isn't going to give you credit for work on someone else's engagement?" "I don't need credit," she said, pulling up a chair next to my desk. "I need experience, and coffee, lots of coffee." That night, Melissa proved herself invaluable. She had a natural understanding of supply chain logistics that went beyond what they teach in business school, and she could build Excel models with a speed and accuracy that impressed even me. More importantly, she seemed to genuinely enjoy the work. While other junior analysts complained about late nights and demanding clients, Melissa thrived on the challenge. We worked until 2 a.m., building a comprehensive analysis of Carlson's supplier network and identifying 3 major inefficiencies that could save the company over $2 million annually. When I presented our findings to Margaret Carlson the following week, she was so impressed that she asked Richard Hartstone to personally commend the team that had worked on her project. That commendation was a career-defining moment for me. It led directly to my promotion to senior consultant and put me on the VP track, and I made sure Melissa got full credit for her contributions, even though she'd volunteered her time. From that night forward, we became genuine friends. Not just workplace acquaintances, but actual friends who grabbed dinner after particularly brutal days, texted each other weekend updates, and celebrated each other's victories. Melissa became my sounding board for everything from client strategy to office politics to career planning. She had this amazing ability to see situations from multiple angles, to identify potential problems before they became crises, and to offer practical advice without being preachy. When I was stressed about a difficult presentation, she'd help me rehearse. When I was frustrated with a micromanaging partner, she'd listen to me vent and then help me figure out how to manage the relationship more effectively. The Meridian Industries opportunity came up 5 months ago during one of our regular Friday afternoon debriefs. Richard Hartstone had called an all-hands meeting to announce that we'd been invited to compete for the biggest contract in the firm's history. Meridian Industries, a Fortune 100 manufacturing giant, was looking for a consulting partner to completely overhaul their global supply chain operations. The scope was staggering, a 2-year engagement worth over $15 million, with the potential for additional work that could double that figure. More importantly for consultants like me, it was the kind of high-profile project that could launch careers into the stratosphere. The senior consultant who led the winning proposal would be fast-tracked to partner consideration. Richard announced that 3 teams would compete internally for the right to lead the proposal develop. Meant each team would have 8 weeks to develop a preliminary strategy, and the best approach would become Hartstone's official submission to Meridian. I knew immediately that I had to lead one of those teams. This was the opportunity I'd been working toward for my entire career, the chance to prove that I belonged in the upper echelons of management consulting. When I told Melissa about my intention to compete for the team leader position, she was incredibly supportive. "You're perfect for this," she said without hesitation. "Your supply chain expertise, your analytical skills, your presentation abilities, this is exactly the kind of project you were meant to lead." Her confidence in me was infectious. I'd been battling imposter syndrome for most of my career, always wondering if I was smart enough, experienced enough, strategic enough to compete with my peers. But Melissa's unwavering belief in my abilities helped quiet those doubts. I spent the next week developing my pitch for why I should lead the Meridian proposal team. I outlined my relevant experience, my innovative analytical approaches, and my vision for how Hartstone could differentiate itself from McKinsey and Blackstone Strategic Solutions, our primary competitors for the contract. When Richard announced that I'd been selected to lead the team, Melissa was the first person to congratulate me. She brought champagne to the office that Friday afternoon and insisted we celebrate properly. This is going to change everything. For you, she said, raising her plastic cup in a toast. Senior consultant to VP track to partner in 3 years. I'm calling it now. Looking back now, knowing what I know, that celebration feels like the cruelest joke imaginable. Melissa wasn't toasting my success, she was toasting my impending destruction. She wasn't celebrating my opportunity, she was celebrating hers. But at the time, her enthusiasm felt genuine, supportive, and exactly what I needed to hear. At the time, I thought I'd found not just a colleague but a true friend who wanted to see me succeed. At the time, I trusted her completely, and that trust was about to destroy everything I'd spent 4 years building.